Good evening, everyone. If you don't know who I am, my name is Kim Ha. I am the director of the Pennington Public Library, and thank you so much for joining us for a conversation with local author Vicki Weisfeld. If you have any questions during the program, please feel free to either write them into the Q&A section or in the chat window, as many of you are writing in right now, and I will interweave your questions and comments during our conversation. Let me introduce everyone to Vicki Weisfeld. Award-winning short story writer Vicki Weisfeld is a Midwesterner, a transplanted to New Jersey. Over 30 of Vicki's short stories have appeared in leading mystery magazines and anthologies, winning awards from the Short Mystery Fiction Society and the Public Safety Writers Association. She's a member of Sisters in Crime, Mystery Writers of America, and other crime fiction organizations. Vicki's first novel, Architect of Courage, was published in June 2022 and is set in the summer of 2011. And in Vicki's story, everything goes from bad to worse for Manhattan architect Archer Landis, who must find the courage first to survive and then for redemption. You may follow Vicki on her blog at www.vweisfeld.com. Welcome, Vicki. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're excited to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk to readers.
Yes, it's wonderful, and you're local, and we found out about you through one of our book club members. So I'm very thrilled that I get to speak to you this evening. You know, when I read your book, I thought it was interesting because I don't think I've ever read a book featuring an architect before. Could you tell everyone a little bit about how you started writing about Archer Landis, our main protagonist in this story?
Well, I wanted to write a story that had a professional person at the head. And there are so many doctors and lawyers who write mysteries that I thought, well, I can't compete with them because I'm not a doctor or a lawyer, but I know quite a bit about the architecture world and the sort of the kind of sensibility that artists and creative people have. And I've also been a subscriber to Metropolis magazine, which deals with all that stuff for over 30 years or almost 40 years, I think. So I kind of felt like I could write about that kind of person with some authenticity.
Now, do you have any training in architecture yourself? How did you go about researching that aspect of the book?
Well, I brought a lot to it because I've always been interested in it. My dad designed our house himself. They were big fans, devotees, you could say, of Frank Lloyd Wright. And when they were going to build a house in the 50s, my parents wrote to him and asked if he would design their house. And of course, he recognized immediately what their budget would probably be. So he politely declined. But anyway, all that, talking about it and thinking about it. And in the 50s and early 60s, our weekends were spent going from one housing development to another and then looking at the houses and what was good about them and what was not good. And so I just have been kind of attuned to that world.
Wow. Could you tell us about your main character, Archer Landis, a little bit, about your thoughts in developing his personality, his background? You must have been living in his mind for quite some time.
Yes. When it comes to writing, I'm what your readers or your participants may recognize as a pantser. I develop a story sort of organically. I don't come into it with 50 little note cards with what I think Archer is. I have to get to know him. You're exactly right about that, and how he would behave in certain situations. And I really admire him because I think that he didn't have any special training to deal with the kinds of problems he was suddenly faced with. And he managed to work his way through them and retained his integrity. Now, in the beginning, the very beginning of the book, his girlfriend is shot to death, and he makes a big mistake right at that point. And so a lot of the rest of the book is him coming back from that error and trying to reestablish his self-esteem. Nobody knows he made this mistake. I mean, he never tells anybody and no one knows it. But he's the kind of, a lot of people, if you did something wrong and no one knew it, you just let it go. He's not that type of person. He's going to try to redeem himself, even if no one else ever appreciates what he's had to go through.
Now, for those of you who haven't read the book, this isn't really a spoiler that that Vicki just mentioned, because this is how the book opens, which really, I don't know, it drew me in immediately. So Archer, he visits his girlfriend and finds that she's shot. That's how it opens.
Yeah.
Could you, I guess, take us into your thought process in opening the book this way?
Well, when I started this book, that's all I had. For some reason, I don't know why, that image kind of came into my mind. And I had no idea where it was going to go from there, but I thought that would be a nice dramatic way to start a book. And so I wrote that scene out, and then I thought, well, okay, but then what happens? Does he call the police or doesn't he? And what's the consequences of that? And if he goes back to the dinner that he was at, how does he behave with his colleagues if he pretending that everything is okay? How does that work? And then he has to go home, and he has his wife and his son are there. And when he's had this tremendous personal loss, how does he interact with them, and what problems and issues do they throw at his feet to deal with? So yeah, it just kind of grew from there.
Wow. Well, it's quite an opening. I know we didn't discuss you reading this part of the book, but would you mind reading the opening of the book at the very beginning? Now that we're talking about the opening, I just can't help but ask you to share the opening with us.
Okay.
Maybe up until the start of the second page, perhaps.
Okay. When Manhattan architect Archer Landis let himself into Julia's apartment, he was surprised to find it dark. He strode down the short entry hall to the living room and felt for the light switch. The heavy draperies were closed, and thick blackness pressed in on him. A trace of her perfume teased the air, along with another smell, elemental, evoking something. Julia, I'm here. For Landis, the second-floor apartment was a treasure trove. Its sangria-colored walls crowded with portraits and huge mirrors with carved gold-painted frames. Deeply fringed paisley shawls draped chaises upholstered in carmine velvet. It would require all his French curves and a full palette of rose and violet pigments to reproduce that effect. His glance traveled the room, skipping past something he didn't want to see, something his brain didn't at first accept that he had seen, until it reached the farthest corner and unwillingly returned to settle on the room's one discordant object. Julia sprawled on a chaise, the white lace ruffle of her shirt front soaked with blood. For a moment, Landis's heart stopped. He stood frozen at the edge of the room, yet he saw himself rushing to her, kissing her hands, grabbing her shoulders and shaking her, soothing her, calling her. She didn't move, and neither did he. He choked before he could create a single word.
If that doesn't draw you in, I don't know what will. That's phenomenal. Thank you, Vicki, for sharing that passage. I couldn't help but notice there's the detail also in Julia's apartment in this scene. And you do describe her apartment at length, and also Archer's apartment as well. Could you tell us a little bit about what you envisioned in setting the scene?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you find out, as you read a little bit more, Julia had presented herself as being of Spanish origin. So a lot of the sangria colored walls, the black lace curtains like mantillas for giant women, all these things are just have this little dab of Spanishness about them. And I wanted a picture in readers' minds of an apartment that was very colorful, very rich in detail, deeply dark colors and so forth. In the next chapter, when Archer goes home to his own apartment, the walls are all white. The carpet is gray. The furniture is white. There's no color on the walls at all, except for one. There was some black and white stuff probably, but there's one painting with just little tiny dabs of color in it. And I wanted that contrast to be in, at least in readers' subconscious minds, so they could see the difference between the two very visually and think, well, this is one reason he was so attracted to Julia, because she was so different from what he was accustomed to.
Wow. Yeah, I love the contrast between her apartment, which you described here, and then later his place.
And I do a similar thing describing the women. Marjorie, Archer's wife, is tall and thin and wears drapey knit garments that, to the floor that are, I think I described them as some color that was so pale you didn't even know what it was the pale of. Was it a pale rose or a pale bisque or a pale taupe, or what was it? It was just almost colorless. Whereas when he describes Julia, she wore watermelon pink, lime green, tangerine, and so forth. And he talks about her licorice colored hair. In other words, she's always wearing bright, vibrant colors, in contrast again with his wife. And she, the way that I chose the adjectives to describe what she wears was deliberately food-oriented things, because when he's looking at her, basically he would just like to eat her up. He just really loves her. So yeah, that's fun to kind of think of those things, and readers don't need to be consciously aware of all that. It's at the subconscious level, I think, that people respond to those kinds of descriptions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, I wonder for our listeners right now, Donald, he has a comment and a question. Familiar settings and self-knowledge can seep into stories. Did you have this experience, or was research necessary, or both?
Oh my goodness, the amount of research I did. I really research everything, because I think it's important to get the details right. We living so close to New York, we go to New York a lot, but I'm talking about how it was in 2011, the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And that date was picked on purpose because at that time, the authorities, the FBI, the police, everybody was really anxious in the months leading up to the anniversary, thinking, well, there may be a 10th anniversary repeat of terrorism. And so they were really hyper alert. And that plays into the story. That's an important piece in the story, that they overreact. But yes, I did research on places. I have one part of the book goes to Brussels, where I have never been.
Oh.
In one part, it goes to Tarifa, Spain, where I have been. But I did a lot of research with maps and photo research, which is very helpful for establishing what does the place look like. I mean, how can I get the feel and the smell and the everything of that? And then, of course, for the New York part, where Archer ends up having to deal with the police department and so forth, I marked every page that had anything to do with the police on it and spent time with a retired New York Police Department detective, and we went over everything. Said, now, is this what they would do? Is this how they would react, and so forth? And got a lot of good tips there.
Wow. So you said you've never been to Brussels. Did you actually travel to any of so you've been to Tarifa?
Not
So you
not
didn't
for this book. I
okay.
had been to Tarifa some years ago, but I knew what it was.
Okay. Fascinating. Now, did you actually follow any architects in any architectural firm similarly to the police, or?
I did not. I didn't.
Okay.
I put in a lot of detail, but I made the detail generalizable. So I didn't think that anybody was going to object. And you can read a book where it's about some profession, or I read a book recently about an architect, and I just really thought the person was skimming the surface. I went a little bit deeper than that, but beyond that, beyond that, I didn't really need to go.
Okay.
But one fun thing I think I tried to do that I hope readers will enjoy is a lot of times when you read a book, when the hero is not a police detective or not a private investigator, so this is not their regular job of work, but they are called upon to investigate a crime for whatever reason they've decided to do it. And it's like they have no other lives, that there's nothing else out going on in their life. They have just totally devoted to solving this mystery. And for Archer, he's the head of a big architecture firm with people all around the world and huge multi-million-dollar projects. He can't, even though a lot of stuff is thrown in his path, he can't just step back from that. So that was fun, figuring out ways that he could keep working and keep working with his people, but yet devote the space in his mind to thinking about his other dilemmas.
I always wonder about that when I watch mysteries and the main character is someone who has a very rich personal life as well as their investigations, how they balance that. So, Annie has a question for you as well right here. What was your process approaching a novel-length book after all your success writing short format fiction?
Well, as I said, I'm a pantser, and if you haven't heard that term before, it's a person that writes by the seat of their pants. Whereas the other approach that people use, and everybody needs to find their own way of working, is to get like a million Post-its or a million 3x5 cards and write all the scenes down. I saw a picture the other day on Facebook of a friend who had a table, and he had all these Post-its he spread out. Thank goodness I know exactly where the book is going. Oh my gosh, I couldn't write like that if my life depended on it. Because for me, the joy of writing is discovery. And I like to discover. I didn't know what Archer was going to do after he found Julia's body. I had to kind of unfold that, and it was a big surprise to me too. So yeah, that's just a different way of working. A lot of people like to do, they have a 20-page outline or a 50-page outline for the book. Oh my gosh, it gives me the creeps.
You make me think of, I recently heard an interview with author Jane Yolen, and now I know this term, she's also a pantser because she loves the discovery just like you do, that discovery of what happens next. And she's collaborated with her son before, who's the exact opposite. He likes everything plotted out beforehand. But she had said that for her, part of the process of discovery means having to go back and edit and edit and edit some more. I mean, what do you find for yourself?
Absolutely. When you get to the end and write the end, you're really just beginning, because you've got to go back, and because now I know Archer so much better. so I can evaluate everything I said that he would do or would say, or is that something that character would really say? Is this really true to who they are, the way that, and it has to happen more than once, actually.
Wow. Wow. Now
But that's
yes.
fun for me. I love editing. I love making clarifying what I meant. And sometimes I'll look at a sentence and what was I trying to say here? And I have to kind of reconstruct or forget it because it's just confusing, even
Now,
to me.
what was the most I guess surprising part of the process of writing a longer form piece of work for you as opposed to the shorter form in this discovery that you've made?
It was establishing a new rhythm of working. There's a short story and novel writer, I believe it was Brendan Dubois, who said a short story is like a smash and grab robbery, whereas a novel is the long con, and you're setting things up and you don't know where they're going to go. I experimented with this one, and as I was working on it, I threw in a few possible clues, and I didn't know if they were going to turn out to mean anything or not. For instance, fairly early on, when the police come to Archer's office, they have pictures of Julia, and including pictures of her wrists where there are some deep scars from a very serious suicide attempts. Well, this was total news to him, and he was really quite thrown by it. And I didn't know whether those scars were going to have a place in the story or not. But 225 pages later, my subconscious mind was still at work. And when Art starts to find out more about Julia's life before she came to New York, there was a serious suicide attempt, and I'd totally forgotten that, but all of a sudden here was the spot for that information. Yeah.
Wow, you make it sound so much fun.
It's really fun.
I know some authors, for some authors, it's like running a marathon where it's work and work, and the reward comes when you cross the finish line. But I'm getting a sense here that it's play for you.
No, I like the process a lot too. And I've probably read this book 10 times or more. And every time I read it, I think, oh gosh, I've got to read it again. And I'll start and I'll get involved with it and think, gosh, this is so interesting. Oh, well, so yeah, I get engaged with it myself. And I think that's probably a good sign.
Yeah, that's great. Now that you're describing your process a little, I just want to say, I don't want to give anything away too much, but there was an aspect of Archer's partner at the firm that completely shocked me by the end. And we can talk offline about
it. It was very deliberate.
It was deliberate. I wasn't sure if it was
very
deliberate or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I think I know exactly what you mean.
Okay, but I was completely
my editor
surprised.
said I shouldn't spring that on people, but I left it.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your genre, you tend to write very gritty work and mysteries, and I was reading about female filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
I always get inspired by women in many different fields, and I was reading about how a lot of women are still struggling in filmmaking and writing for film. People don't think that they can write male characters. People don't think that they can write something that's gritty or write any violence. And it just shocks me when I read this nowadays that this is still the case. For you, do you find this is the case in writing novels and short stories, or
I think it probably was, and but there have been so many path-breaking women who have written great stories, and so many of them write way grittier stuff than I do. I think well, maybe it's my short stories that I try to end on a hopeful note. I don't, instead of a downbeat, but I don't think that is the problem. I think it's more at the reader end. And there have been quite a few, it's harder in some ways to get the attention of editors and publishers. And in part, it's my age probably too, agents and so forth. But I don't think they object or have a preconceived idea of what a woman will write. Readers, when they're polled, men readers don't necessarily like to read women's stuff because they think it'll be too fluffy, or I suppose. But that's a whole different genre of crime fiction. That's the cozy mysteries that where the detective, the person that investigates the crime, runs a cupcake shop or a knitting circle or a Jane Austen reading group or something. You know, it's not this kind of book at all, where there are a lot of women who do write really good, solid mysteries. So I think men will come around. Now, if they want just a pure action adventure, which is fun to read sometimes too, I like those every once in a while. This is not going to be that. This really takes you on more of a emotional journey with Archer as he struggles through this. But
yes,
yeah,
he does struggle. Poor guy. So
right.
we have a question from one of our attendees. Was there anything in your past and your life that was used in writing this novel? Oh, very, very broad.
I can definitely say yes, because in my stories, in all my stories, you can't help but bring everything that you know and have seen and have read and have thought and have so forth to everything you do. So there are little bits of people and so forth. I wouldn't say I've ever modeled a whole character on a particular person, but you take a bit from this one and a bit from that one, and people usually don't recognize themselves anyway if they turn up in a book, and they usually think they're someone else. But at least my friends who write and who have modeled on a character find that to be true.
Fascinating. We did mention your love of architecture, which you brought into the novel. And we know that you've been to Tarifa, so yes. You know, speaking of your own background, literally your background, there are several people who are curious about what the image you have behind you.
Oh, that's the Forbidden City in China.
Yes.
It's a mural that you can buy, these huge murals online, and I was telling Kim about it earlier. It came in 3 parts that you stick onto the wall with Velcro, which I did, and the next morning 2 of the parts were lying on the floor. So my handyman came up with the idea of putting these little lathe-like things around and to hold it in place, which I have had this up since 2001. So it's been a long time. And I really like it. It adds so much to the room rather than having a blank wall.
Yes, yes. Now, Vicki, is this your writing space? Are we glimpsing your, wow.
Except I hid a lot of my piles of paper.
And what is your process, your day-to-day writing process like?
My preferred writing process, which I won't say I've always managed to do that, is to get up real early in the morning. When I was writing this book, I would get up at 5:30 or something and write for a couple hours, and then I would get coffee, and then I would write for a couple hours, and then that would be what it was. But now I've been sleeping a little later, and my cats spend the night in this office. And so they want to be fed. And so I end up doing a lot of little chores before I can come up here and start writing.
Wow. Wow. You mentioned that sometimes it's harder at your age, and I've spoken to a couple other authors who find that to be the case as well. Um, could you go into the publishing process and the process of finding an agent and what that has meant and your challenges and in doing so?
Sure. I wrote to a great many agents and never got any interest or response. And then I decided, instead of pursuing that, where then the agent has to try to find a publisher, so that you have to go through this process twice. So I instead started contacting small publishers who specialize in crime and thrillers and so forth. And still, I didn't have much luck, but finally, a friend of mine read the book and loved it. And so he recommended me to his publisher, who then took me on. And I, got it out last June.
Wow. Wow. What advice would you give to people who want to pursue writing?
Well, first of all, write a lot, even if it just goes into a drawer, that's fine. But write the book that you want to write. Don't think, oh gosh, books about psychological thrillers where there's a domestic issue that's really popular now. Don't do that unless that's what you really, really want to do. Write your own book. And by the time that the book comes out, the fad may have moved on. But your heart really, it's a lot of work, and your heart really needs to be in it. So if you pick a topic or a storyline that really speaks to you, then you're on a good track. So write a lot. And as you've mentioned, I started with short stories. My first short story was published in 2007 in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, which actually pays nicely. And when the letter came from them and I opened it up, I didn't know what it was, but it was the contract. This is back before they sent everything by email. It was a really thick envelope, and I thought, why is Penny Dell Press writing to me? But I opened it up, it was the contract for that story. And I just stood there and cried because I was so surprised and happy. And now, of course, everything's done electronically, so it's not quite the same thrill.
Yeah, that sounds so special. Kathleen has a question for you. Hi, Vicki. Going back to your writing process, do you shut down after a session, or are you frequently going back throughout the day with another inspiration?
Well, I have other things that I'm doing. I'm maintaining my website and doing other things. So sometimes I am here at the computer, so it's easy just to open up my file and fix something. But a lot of times I just write myself a little note, and then I just incorporate those notes the next time I sit down to work on the larger project, because it's a mistake. In my own case, it's a mistake for me to think, oh, I'll remember to such and such, because I'll remember that there was something I wanted to do, but what it was is beyond me. So I'm better off if I make a note.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know many people have a notebook on their bedside table. Does that sound like you, where you wake up in the middle of the night and
Well, I've been known to get up in the middle of the night, go get a notebook and write down something. Yes.
Can't lose those ideas.
No.
So Joan has another question for you. Do you already have a theme in mind for your next novel, or do you need to take a break after writing this?
Well, really, Joan, I worked on the two novels at the same time. I would work on Architect for 4 or 5 months, go through it very laboriously, word by word, And then I would stop and I would work on the other book, which is totally different, and it's set in Rome. So I would work on that one for a few months. And the same one, I had an outside editor. I sent her first this novel, got her comments back, and was working on incorporating them. And then I sent her the other one. So I just traded them back and forth. So I never got that tired of either book. Each book was,
Wow.
sometimes I'd have an idea and I think, now which book is that in? I'd have to think about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was thinking that sounds, I mean, for me, it would sound very confusing to
Not
juggle
really,
both
because
stories
when
so
I'm in
well.
it, when I'm working on this one, I'm like totally focused on this. And when I'm working on the other one, I'm totally focused on it. So it's one of the few benefits of a short attention span.
Wow. Could you give us a little a sneak peek at your other book that you've been working on? You said something about Rome, which sounds delightful
Yeah.
already.
It's more of a typical thriller in that there are chapters with different points of view. The Architect of Courage is all written from Archer's point of view. You only know what he knows, even if he's wrong about something. That's all you know. You may second guess him, but that's it. You're in his mind, sort of. The other one features my travel writer, Eugenia Clark, Jeannie, and she's in Rome, getting ready to come home. And she overhears some guys planning something that sounds to her shady. And when one of them follows her and she's badly mugged, she knows that she overheard something she shouldn't have heard.
Ooh.
And so she's in the hospital then. And a police detective comes in, and he's the other main character. And they sort of have a romantic interest, except the timing is so wrong. They can't even, neither one of them will go there, but they are attracted to each other. And the bad guys, we see them too. We have scenes from their point of view. Couple others, but do try not to have too many.
That sounds so intriguing. When I read Architect of Courage, and similarly to how you've just described your novel with Eugenie, they both sound like they lend themselves to a cinematic experience. Do you ever picture your novels as a film, or?
Well, that would be wonderful. Well, yes, I'm a very visual person, so probably my descriptions make that come to life a little bit. But I've been asked that, and who would play the different characters, and that was a real head scratcher.
Oh.
But, I thought of several. I said, but they'd have to be 20 years younger. They would have to have done it 20 years ago.
Oh, okay. Wow. So who do you picture for Archer?
Donald Sutherland.
Oh, okay. Fascinating.
And for Julia, Penelope Cruz.
Oh, nice. In Architect of Courage, you have very detailed action scenes, for example. And how did you research those action scenes, or were they just something that came from the top of your head?
Are you thinking about the confrontations that occur?
Yeah.
I sort of thought that through, and really a scene like that, it happens very quickly. It's over in 3 minutes or something.
Yeah.
But you can't write it that way, because the reader needs to understand it. So you need it to go through it in like slow motion and have everything play out slowly so that it has its most impact. Yeah. Well, I was down on the floor a lot.
I love how it's almost like method writing instead of method acting. It's great.
Right.
I sort of picture some of the action scenes almost in slow motion, like you described, but even cinematically, you know how some filmmakers do slow down the action for
Well, that's true.
effect.
Mhm.
So that could be. Joan here says, "I'd love to see that movie."
I would too. I
Yeah,
wonder if I
yeah.
would recognize it. You know?
Does anyone have any other questions for Vicki? Oh my goodness. Now your novel, the one that you described with Eugenie, is that finished? Are we
Yes,
expecting? Oh, okay.
I'm
Is
looking for a publisher.
oh, okay. And what does that process look like?
Finding a publisher.
Hmm.
Um, well, I'm just at the stage of researching them and finding the ones that are interested in this kind of thing. And first of all, that they're accepting submissions, because a lot of times they get overloaded and they close off. And then once you know who you want to reach out to, there's usually a letter that has to go to them that you describe the book in enough detail that it, in a paragraph or two, I mean, it's really hard.
Wow.
In a paragraph or two, you've got to intrigue them enough that they want to keep reading. And then you say a little bit about yourself, and you say at the end how you heard about them or whatever. Um, I wrote to one last week that I had reviewed the books. I write reviews of crime fiction for a UK website. I write about, I don't know, 50 or 60 reviews a year. And so I have to read all those books. um, they, I had reviewed two that they had published. And so I mentioned those, that I admired those books. And, this is why I thought I would reach out to you. And then they have different requirements. Each publisher has a totally different set
Hmm.
of things they want to see. It might be a 10-page synopsis, a 2-page synopsis, the first 5 pages, the first 50 page, whatever. And you put those little packets together. It's not easy because everything is so customized to their particular requests, and mail them out, and then never hear anything usually.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's frustrating.
is this similar to the process of writing shorter works for you? This process?
Um, with short fiction, that is different in that I often write in response to requests for submissions. We want to do a book about with around the theme of X, Y, or Z. Oh, okay. And we want the submissions to come in by March 31st. Okay. And then we will notify people by June 1st. Okay. For publication in the fall. That's really
Yeah.
easy because you know where you stand with those.
Mm.
I think I have right now only about 4 stories out because one of my stories was just accepted. So usually I have 5, 6 stories out, and then they come back and I find another place and send it there. And it's just an ongoing process. I published a story in 2019 that I had worked on. It was the very first story I'd ever worked on back in 2004. But I kept, every time it came back, I would read it through and polish it up a little bit and keep sending it out. I
Wow.
thought it was a good story, and it probably went to 20 different places before a truly delighted editor had it. So
It,
good.
it it sounds like it's an exercise in persistence. Um,
You can't, that's why I send them out again right away, because you can't get emotionally attached to a certain outcome. You just, oh,
mhm,
okay, fine. Next thing.
mhm, mhm. Um, Valerie has a question for you. Which mystery writer would you enjoy, or do you recommend, or do you enjoy reading?
Mm. Well, there are so many. I really like the books, and they're when I think about it, they're actually more thrillers than whodunits. I really like the books of Alan Furst, F-U-R-S-T, who writes about the period in Europe right before World War II, when an ordinary person, this is my theme, the ordinary person gets asked to do something, says yes, and of course you, the current day reader, with the benefit of hindsight, are thinking, don't do it. But they get in deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's, yeah. So that's, his books are just great. And then I like the books by Kate Quinn, her World War II books, The Huntress, and I just read The Diamond Eye. I liked both of those a lot. And she had a book about the Rose Code in between there, about Bletchley Park. All three of them were good. But there's a, yeah, I would read it. I would pick up any of her books and read it. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So what are your next steps? You finished you're looking for a publisher for another book. But you write frequently. So what are you currently writing, I guess?
Well, I have a short story that I'm working on, and then I want to get started. I have several pieces of my next novel written, and this is really a pantser. I mean, this is like one leg at a time type pantsing. Because I have several pieces of it and I need to knit them together. It also involves my travel writer, and it's set in Egypt. And I went to Egypt in 2019, right before COVID. And before I forget that experience, I wanted to get going on that book.
Well, at least we know that your travel writer survived your first novel featuring her.
Yeah.
That's good
Well,
to know.
The first time I wrote it, my first draft, I didn't really know what I was doing, which will be immediately obvious because it was 130,000 words. And I told a friend of mine about that, and she said, you know, that's awfully long. I don't think anybody will publish that. So she directed me to a website that has in it a preferred length for different types of books. And for my genre, someplace in the 90s, and don't get any closer to the 100,000 than you have to, because it's expensive to print a book, and it's an unknown writer, a new writer. The publisher is going to be balk at a book that's going to be 400 pages or 600 pages. So I had to cut out a lot. And meanwhile, my editor wanted me to add about more of the bad guys stuff. Oh my gosh, I needed to reconceptualize a few things. And there was stuff that just had to go. I mean, there was no justifying keeping it, but it was interesting material. So with that, those chunks that I cut out, I turned 3 of them into short stories, and all 3 of those short stories have been published.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And when you turn them into short stories, are they still featuring your character, or did you just apply them to different characters altogether?
She's in one of them.
Oh.
But I'm not sure about this whole process of mine, but anyway, it's done now. She's in one of the stories, and the other 2 were sort of the backstory of characters. So you couldn't just pick it up and cut it out and plop it into a short story. You had to then work on it and develop it better in it, so that it was a standalone thing, not just why am I reading this type of thing. But it's the 2 that didn't involve her are an easier thing. The one that did involve her, that's a little bit harder, because I learned the hard way that then, as I'm working on that area of the novel, I'm constrained. There are certain things I can't do because I've got in print this version of events, and I might want to change it, but I can't.
Yes, the whole continuity question.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And then, when your books are turned into film, then, you may have
There you
more to
go.
consider.
Yeah, another set of complications.
So, I think we have a question about the website that you write reviews for. Could you tell us
Sure, but
the
the
website?
URL is, yeah, it's
Yeah.
called crimefictionlover.com.
Okay.
Easy. Hmm.
Okay.
There's about 10 or 12 of us who review books for them. They're very on top of it. We have to review the latest books that are just coming out, which means that I never can go back and read things. Oh, people will say, have you ever read a lot of John MacDonald or something? No. And I don't have time to either. I can't go back. Can only
What
get
are what are you looking for when you're reviewing a book in terms of uh, an effective thriller, an effective mystery?
well, it has to make sense. I appreciate good writing. I like my fire preference is a little bit more literary type of an approach rather than just a cut and dried thing. There are a lot of times when what characters do don't make any sense at all. Why would anyone do that? They wouldn't. And uh, at the same time, I read a lot of really good books that, so it's a mixed bag. So
Mhm.
I've been really frustrated with a couple of books lately that were not as good as they should be, and but then on the other hand, then along will come a real gem, so it all evens out.
Mhm, mhm. Now, you mentioned your editor briefly, wanting you to add a lot to your current book. What's it like working with your editor in general? What's the process like?
It was wonderful. I met her at a fiction writing contest or a conference. She's a award-winning mystery short story writer. And I approached her. I thought she seemed awfully nice, and I approached her and said, "Would you ever consider?" And she said, "Sure." She does that sort of thing, and she was great. And in my previous professional career, I did a lot of writing and editing, and so I thought, really, I've got the writing thing down. She's going to send back a few little things, And it was an 11-page single space memo and
Ah.
350 line edits. It's like, oh my gosh. But I learned so much from that process. I took all of her ideas under advisement. Um, her line edits were great, and I really learned point of view problems, which I won't go into. But anyway, I really knocked that one down after working with her. And I sent it back to her with all of her ideas, reflected it through my brain into the writing. I maybe what I found with getting outside critiques of your writing is that people are very good at diagnosis and not too good at treatment. They're really good at telling you where something doesn't make sense, or it's confusing, or it's seems to be lacking, whatever, but they're not good at telling you, you ought to write a character, blah, you don't need that. That's your job. And
Mhm.
anyway, their solutions are not the ones that you as the writer would normally come up with. So I sent it back to her, and she sent back, I thought, well, this is really going to fly this time. It was another 9-page single space with fewer line edits this time, but it's really helpful to have someone who has a sharp eye like that, because really you can just go wrong so easily.
Wow. Wow, it's interesting to hear. I love hearing about the process, Vicki. So thank you so much for sharing. We are approaching our hour. If anyone has any further questions for Vicki, please feel free to type them in to the Q&A or into the chat window. Um, I've just learned so much tonight from talking to you, Vicki. Thank you so much. And
Thank
I
you.
look forward for you visiting our book club too. So for those of you who haven't picked it up yet, Architect of Courage by Vicki Weisfeld. And yeah, I look forward to, I hope that your other books get published because they sound so intriguing. So I'm looking forward to reading them already. All right, everyone. Well, it looks like we don't have any other further questions. So thank you again, Vicki. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
All
And
right.
thanks to all of you out there in Zoom land.
Yes, yes. Good night, everyone.